Anthony Johnson was halfway through his second glass of scotch when his phone lit up at 11:47 p.m. The private jet hummed quietly around him, leather seats still warm from the London board meeting that had just made him another 50 million richer. He glanced at the screen. Jane Nora. His chest tightened. He hadn't seen that name since Rebecca walked out 7 months ago, wedding ring gleaming in her trembling palm. He let it ring once, twice. On the third, he answered, "Jane." No greeting, no warmth, just a voice cracking under the weight of terror. "She's in labor, Anthony." "Rebecca." Her blood pressure is spiking. "The doctors don't know if she'll make it. Or the baby." Anthony's entire body went rigid. "What baby?" A bitter laugh. "Your baby, Anthony. The one you didn't know about because you never fought for her when it mattered." The line went dead. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering against a mahogany table. His lungs forgot how to work. Around him, the jet cabin, custom Italian leather, gold fixtures, everything money could buy, suddenly felt like a tomb. He lurched forward, shouting toward the cockpit, "Get me to Texas. Now. I don't care about flight plans. Reroute. Now." No suitcase. No hesitation. Just the crushing realization that he was about to lose everything that ever mattered. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that your silence became the weapon that destroyed them? Welcome back, my beautiful family. Before we begin, please click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. Anthony Johnson wasn't a coward. He'd faced down corporate raiders, hostile takeovers, senators demanding favors. He'd built an empire from venture capital and ruthless vision. But when his mother looked at Rebecca across their dining table with thinly veiled contempt, when society pages whispered about the mismatch, when his own board questioned his judgment, in choosing a wife from nowhere, Texas, he stayed silent. And that silence chased Rebecca out of his life. 7 months ago, she didn't scream, didn't beg. She simply placed her wedding ring on the marble kitchen island, looked him in the eyes, and said, "I can't fight your battles for you, Anthony. And I won't raise a child in a house where her mother isn't defended." He watched the elevator doors close, watched her dignity disappear behind steel and glass. He told himself she'd come back, that she'd realize how good she had it. That love would be enough. It wasn't. While Anthony drowned in boardrooms and bourbon, Rebecca Nora was building something he'd never understand. A life that didn't need his permission. Back in her Texas hometown, she wasn't broken. She was rebuilding. Mornings meant running her small catering business with Jane, filling orders for church gatherings and community celebrations. Evenings meant swollen ankles, ginger tea, and hands pressed protectively over the secret she carried beneath her apron. She didn't hate Anthony. She just couldn't trust him to protect what mattered most when he hadn't protected her. The August heat clung to San Marcos like a second skin. Rebecca stood in the small commercial kitchen she and Jane rented, rolling out pie dough while gospel hummed from the radio. Her braids were tied back with printed scarf, her belly round and obvious now, though she'd hidden it for months under loose dresses and careful angles. "You need to sit down," Jane said, eyeing her sister's swollen feet. "I need to finish these peach cobblers," Rebecca replied, voice firm but exhausted. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart. 7 months pregnant, divorced, unapologetically back home, she refused to be anyone's cautionary tale. So when neighbors whispered about the New York billionaire who let her go, she smiled, tied her apron tighter, and focused on the next order. But at night, when Jane was asleep and the kitchen was finally quiet, Rebecca would press both hands to her belly and whisper, "I don't regret leaving him, baby. I just wish you were coming into a softer world." Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Anthony sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a plate of food he couldn't taste. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, billions of dollars in real estate, none of it meaning anything. His phone buzzed with congratulations about the London deal. He silenced it. Everything reminded him of her, the way she used a hum while cooking in his sterile kitchen, bringing life to marble and steel, how she leaves sticky notes in his briefcase. "Breathe, baby. You're doing great." She'd made New York feel like home. Without her, it was just expensive emptiness. His world was polished, controlled, powerful. Hers was messy, joyful, grounded. And somehow, she was building more with community and Cobbler than he ever had with capital and contracts. The lights in the Texas emergency room never dimmed. Machines beeped in frantic, uneven rhythms. Nurses moved with controlled urgency down pale green corridors. Anthony stood outside the operating room, fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. The jet had landed 38 minutes ago. He'd broken every speed limit getting here. But he was still too late. Rebecca had already been rushed into emergency surgery. Her blood pressure was critical. The baby's heartbeat was unstable. Preeclampsia. The word felt like a verdict. He pressed his forehead against the cold hospital wall, breath ragged. Please, God, don't let my silence be the last thing she remembers about me. He wasn't a praying man. Not until tonight. Not until the woman he'd vowed to cherish was fighting for her life because he'd been too weak to fight for their love when it mattered. His father had taught him that strength meant silence, that emotions were weakness, that loving someone loudly, defending them fiercely, was beneath a man of his status. So he stayed silent, polite, respectable, absent, and that absence had almost killed her, almost killed the child he didn't even know existed until 2 hours ago. If she lives, he whispered to the flickering fluorescent lights above, I swear I'll never be silent again. Down the corridor, a nurse pushed through the surgical doors, her face unreadable but her steps quick. She scanned the hallway, found Anthony, and moved toward him with purpose. But before we go there, welcome to a story about second chances, about the courage it takes to rebuild what silence destroyed. If you believe that love isn't about grand gestures, but about showing up when it's hardest, you're in the right place. This is a story about a man who had everything except what mattered most, and the woman who refused to accept anything less than protection she deserved. 3 weeks earlier, the smell of butter melting into cast iron filled a small commercial kitchen on Henderson Street. Rebecca Norris stood at the stove, one hand braced against the counter, the other stirring a pot of candied yams that would feed the First Baptist congregation after Sunday service. Her back ached. Her ankles had swollen past the point where her sneakers fit comfortably, but her hands never stopped moving. You're doing too much, Jane said from across the kitchen, piping cream cheese frosting onto red velvet cupcakes. Sit down before you fall down. I'm fine, Rebecca replied, though her voice carried the weight of exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. You said that yesterday. Then you nearly passed out loading the van. Rebecca didn't respond. She adjusted the flame beneath the pot and reached for the cinnamon. Her reflection caught in the stainless steel hood above the stove, braids pulled back, face fuller than it used to be, eyes carrying both determination and something that looked dangerously close to defeat. She didn't look broken. She refused to look broken. But God, she was tired. It had been 7 months since she walked out of Anthony's penthouse with nothing but her dignity and a suitcase full of clothes that no longer fit her life. 7 months since she'd driven 12 hours straight back to Texas, gospel music drowning out the sound of her own crying. 7 months since she'd sworn she would never again shrink herself to fit into someone else's idea of who she should be. San Marcos had welcomed her back the way small towns do, with open arms and endless questions. Where's your husband? Thought you were living in New York? Girl, what happened? Rebecca had smiled through every inquiry, every pitying glance, every whispered conversation that stopped the moment she entered a room. She'd held her head high at the grocery store, at church, at the community center where she and Jane picked up catering contracts. Rebecca Nora doesn't need a billionaire to define her, she'd told Jane one night, unpacking boxes in the small apartment above the bakery they'd rented. Mama didn't raise us to wait for men to give us permission to live. And she meant it. She'd thrown herself into work with the kind of focus that only comes from needing to outrun your own heartbreak. She and Jane had revived her late mother's catering recipes. Her peach cobbler, her honey-glazed cornbread, her mac and cheese that made grown men weep with nostalgia. Word spread quickly. Within 2 months, Nora's Sisters Catering had more orders than they could handle. The business became her refuge, her proof that she could build something beautiful from the rubble of a failed marriage. But then came the morning sickness she tried to ignore, the missed period she blamed on stress, the second pink line on the pregnancy test that had sent her sliding down the bathroom wall, foam clutched in shaking hands. She'd stare at that test for 20 minutes before Jane knocked on the door. "Becca, you okay in there?" When she finally emerged, Jane had taken one look at her face and known. No words needed, just arms wrapping around her older sister, while Rebecca finally let herself break. "Does he know?" Jane had whispered. Rebecca shook her head. "And he's not going to." Now, 3 weeks before the emergency call, Rebecca moved through her kitchen like a woman determined to prove the universe wrong. She worked 14-hour days. She smiled through contractions she tried to pass off as just a baby moving. She deflected every concerned question with reassurances that became less convincing by the day. "Rebecca, your face is puffy," Mrs. Patterson from the church auxiliary had said just last Sunday, studying her with the sharp eyes of a woman who'd raised 6 children. "You drinking enough water? Your pressure okay?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. Just tired." But she wasn't fine. The swelling had started in her feet, then crept up her calves. Some mornings she could barely get her rings off. Her vision would blur at random moments, once while driving, once while carrying a tray of dishes. She'd chalked it up to pregnancy, to stress, to everything except what it actually was. Her body was betraying her. Last Tuesday, she'd fainted while loading sheet pans into the catering van. Jane had found her crumpled on the hot asphalt, conscious but disoriented, hands still gripping the van door. "That's it," Jane had said, voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "We're going to the hospital. We have the Johnson wedding order to finish." "I don't give a damn about the Johnson wedding. Rebecca!" Jane rarely yelled. The shock of it had silenced any protest. At the emergency room, a tired-looking doctor with kind eyes had taken Rebecca's blood pressure 3 times, each reading worse than the last. "Mrs. Johnson." "Ms. Nora," Rebecca corrected quietly. "Ms. Nora, your blood pressure is dangerously high. 168/110. Combined with the swelling, the headaches you mentioned, the visual disturbances, you're showing signs of severe preeclampsia." The word hung in the air like a sentence. "What does that mean?" Jane asked, gripping her sister's hand. "It means," the doctor said carefully, "that both mother and baby are at risk. Preeclampsia can lead to seizures, organ failure, or worse. At 32 weeks, we need to monitor this very closely. I'm going to prescribe bed rest, blood pressure medication, and weekly checkups. If your condition worsens, we may need to deliver early." Rebecca's free hand moved instinctively to her belly. "But it's too early. Which is why we're going to do everything we can to keep you both safe as long as possible. But Ms. Nora," the doctor's voice grew firm, "you need to take this seriously. No more 14-hour days. No more physical labor. This isn't just about you anymore." Rebecca had nodded, numb, while Jane filled a prescription and scheduled the follow-up appointments. That night, lying in her small bedroom with Jane asleep in the next room, Rebecca finally let herself cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears she'd allowed herself after leaving Anthony. These were the raw, choking sobs of someone who tried so hard to be strong and was realizing that strength alone might not be enough. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palms. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "I thought I could do this alone. I thought I could be enough for both of us." The baby kicked, a small flutter against her ribs. "Your daddy," her voice cracked. "Your daddy is a good man who was too afraid to be great. He could negotiate $1 million deals, but he couldn't stand up to his mother when she looked at me like I was dirt she tracked on her shoes." Another kick. "I don't hate him for it. I needed him to fight for us, for me, and when it mattered most, he stayed silent." Tears slid down her temples, dampening her pillowcase. "But you," she continued, voice steadier now, "you're going to know your worth. You're going to know that love without protection isn't love at all. You're going to know that you deserve someone who will defend you, not just provide for you." She closed her eyes, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I just hope I'm around long enough to teach you. Jane stood in the hallway outside Rebecca's bedroom, back pressed against the wall, hand covering her mouth to stifle her own crying. She'd heard every word, heard the fear her sister was too proud to voice in daylight, heard the loneliness that hard work and brave faces couldn't disguise. For 7 months, Jane had respected Rebecca's decision. She'd supported her sister's choice to cut Anthony out completely, to rebuild without looking back. She'd watched Rebecca pour everything into the business, into creating a life that didn't need anyone's validation. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival. Jane pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the number Rebecca had made her delete months ago. But Jane had written down first, just in case. Anthony Johnson's cell. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Rebecca would be furious. She'd feel betrayed. She'd accuse Jane of going behind her back, of not respecting her choices, of treating her like a child who couldn't manage her own life. But if something happened, if Rebecca's pressure spiked, if the baby came too early, if the worst-case scenario the doctor had carefully danced around actually happened, Jane would never forgive herself for staying silent. She thought about her sister lying alone in the dark, whispering apologies to a baby whose father didn't know he existed. She thought about their mother, gone 4 years now, who'd always said, "Sometimes doing the right thing means making people angry." Jane took a breath and pressed call. She'd deal with Rebecca's anger later. Right now, she had to live with her conscience, and her conscience was screaming that Anthony Johnson needed to know his child existed before it was too late to matter. 2 weeks later, Rebecca collapsed in the kitchen during the dinner rush for Mayor Hendrick's retirement party. This time, she didn't wake up right away. This time, the ambulance came with sirens blazing. This time, the doctors used words like emergency and critical and we need to operate. This time, Jane didn't hesitate. She stood in the hospital corridor, phone in hand, and made the call that would bring Anthony Johnson racing across state lines. The call that would change everything. The jet engines hummed beneath him, a sound that usually brought Anthony peace. The steady, powerful drone of machinery obeying his commands, taking him wherever he wanted to go, whenever he wanted to leave. Control, predictability, success measured in altitude and speed. Tonight, it sounded like a countdown. Anthony pressed his forehead against the cold window, watching clouds tear past in the darkness. Somewhere below, state lines blurred together, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Tennessee, each mile bringing him closer to Texas. To Rebecca, to a child he'd only learned existed 2 hours ago. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Jaw tight, eyes hollow, a man who'd built empires but couldn't build a family. She's in labor, Anthony. They don't know if she or the baby will make it. Jane's words looped in his mind like a prosecutor's closing argument, damning him with every repetition. He'd tried calling back. 5 times. She'd ignored every attempt. He deserved that. He deserved worse. He reached for his scotch, then pushed it away. He needed to be clear-headed, needed to be present in a way he'd failed at for the entirety of his marriage. The flight attendant approached quietly. "Mr. Johnson, will be landing in approximately 90 minutes. Is there anything?" "No, thank you." She retreated, leaving him alone with the ghost that had been circling since the moment he'd answered Jane's call. The first ghost was a memory wrapped in August heat and the smell of peaches. 3 years ago, a Saturday afternoon in San Marcos, Texas, a town Anthony had driven through exactly once on his way to a resort in Austin. He'd stopped for gas and ended up at a farmer's market because his assistant had insisted he experience authentic local culture for some godforsaken wellness retreat his publicist thought would humanize him. He'd been irritated, overdressed in slacks and a button-down, and profoundly bored by tables of homemade jam and hand-carved trinkets. Until he saw her. Rebecca had been manning a booth for her mother's catering business, hair in loose curls that caught the sunlight, wearing a sundress the color honey and a smile that could have stopped traffic. She was handing out samples of peach cobbler to a line of customers who looked at her like she was the best part of their day. Anthony had joined the line without thinking. When he reached the front, she'd looked at him, really looked, the way most people did once they knew his net worth, and said, "You're not from around here, are you?" That obvious, "Baby, You're wearing dress shoes to a farmer's market in 90-degree heat. She'd laughed, rich and unself-conscious. Either you're lost or you're trying too hard. He'd been charmed immediately. Maybe both. She'd handed him a sample. Well, this'll fix at least one of those problems. He'd tasted her mother's recipe and felt something shift in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with cobbler and everything to do with a woman smiling at him like he was just a man, not a portfolio. "What's your name?" he'd asked. "Rebecca. Rebecca Nora." She'd extended her hand. "And you are—" "Anthony. Anthony Johnson." No recognition in her eyes. No sudden shift to the calculated interest he usually encountered. Just genuine warmth and a smile that made him want to keep talking. He'd bought 6 cobblers that day. Came back the next Saturday for more. And the Saturday after that. By the 4th visit, he'd stopped pretending it was about the cobbler. "You keep buying these, Mr. Johnson, and my mama's going to think you're opening a competing bakery," Rebecca had teased. "Actually," he'd said, surprising himself with his own courage, "I was hoping you'd let me take you to dinner." She studied him for a long moment, head tilted, eyes searching for something he desperately hoped she'd find. "Dinner," she'd repeated. "In San Marcos, or in wherever you're from?" "Wherever you want." "Then how about right here? There's a barbecue place 2 blocks over. Best brisket in Texas. No reservations required. No dress code." He'd taken her to that barbecue place. They'd sat on picnic benches under string lights, eating with their hands, talking until the owner started putting chairs up on tables. He'd learned about her mother's catering business, her dream of expanding it, her love for her community and her church, and the simplicity of a life built on connection rather than competition. She'd asked him what he did, and he'd said, "Investments." She'd laughed. "That's the vaguest answer I've ever heard. I'm trying not to scare you off." "Baby, if you haven't scared me off with those fancy shoes, your job probably won't do it either." The second ghost was wrapped in stained glass and gospel music. 18 months later, Anthony had stood in Rebecca's childhood church, Greater Hope Baptist, a modest building with wooden pews and an organ that wheezed on humid days. He'd flown in that morning with a ring burning a hole in his pocket and a plan that was either brilliant or insane. Rebecca had been in the choir loft, swaying with the other singers, voice blending into something that sounded like joy made audible. She hadn't known he was coming. He'd coordinated with Pastor Williams in secret, called in every favor to make sure he could do this right. When the pastor called him forward during announcements, Rebecca's face had shifted from confusion to shock. Anthony had walked down that center aisle in front of 200 people who'd known Rebecca since she was born. People who'd loved her mother, who'd watched her grow up, who were now watching this New York billionaire invade their sacred space. He'd taken the microphone, hands shaking in a way they never did during board presentations. "I know I'm not from here," he'd begun. "I know I'm not who most of you expected Rebecca to end up with. But I'm here because I love her. Not the version of her that would fit my world, but exactly who she is. Her faith, her community, her roots." He'd turned to Rebecca, who descended from the choir loft, tears already streaming. "Rebecca Nora, you've made me believe in things I thought didn't exist. You've made me want to be better than the man I was raised to be. You've shown me that home isn't a place, it's a person." He dropped to one knee. The church had gone absolutely silent. "Will you marry me?" She'd said yes before he'd even finished opening the ring box. The congregation had erupted in applause and amens and organ music that rattled the windows. Pastor Williams had been crying. Jane had been crying. Anthony had been crying and didn't care who saw. It had been perfect. It had been the last time he'd been brave enough to choose her publicly. The third ghost was his mother's voice, crisp and cutting as a scalpel. "She's lovely, Anthony. Truly. But have you thought about what this means for your position?" The Johnson name carries expectations. They'd been at his mother's estate in Connecticut 1 month after the engagement. Brunch on the terrace overlooking manicured gardens that cost more to maintain than most people's mortgages. Rebecca had excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Anthony alone with Eleanor Johnson and her thinly veiled disapproval. "What expectations, Mother?" "Don't be obtuse. You're being groomed for significant roles. Political appointments, perhaps board positions with institutions that value discretion. Rebecca is discreet. Rebecca is from Texas. His mother had said it like a diagnosis. She's a caterer, Anthony. Her mother ran a soul food restaurant. These are not the credentials of someone who can navigate the circles you're entering. I'm not marrying her credentials. No, you're marrying her because she's different, exotic, refreshing. Eleanor had sipped her mimosa delicately. But marriages built on novelty rarely survive reality. When the thrill fades, you'll be left with someone who doesn't understand your world, someone who will hold you back. That's not fair. Fair has nothing to do with it. I'm trying to protect you from making a mistake that will haunt you for decades. Anthony should have stood up, should have told his mother that Rebecca was the best thing that had ever happened to him, should have made it clear that any institution, political appointment, or board position that required him to diminish his wife was something he wanted no part of. Instead, he'd said, "I appreciate your concern, Mother, but I've made my decision," and thought that was enough. It hadn't been enough. Over the following months, his mother's campaign had been subtle but relentless. Comments about Rebecca's casual wardrobe at formal events, surprise remarks about her lack of interest in yacht clubs and charity galas, passive-aggressive questions about whether Anthony had considered how Rebecca's background might affect his trajectory. And Anthony had let it happen, not because he agreed, but because confrontation with Eleanor Johnson was exhausting, and he convinced himself that ignoring it was better than engaging. He'd thought his love for Rebecca would be obvious enough, that she'd understand he was choosing her by staying married to her. But love without defense isn't love. It's cowardice wearing a wedding ring. He'd watched Rebecca shrink at family dinners, watched her go quiet when his mother made suggestions about her hair, her clothes, her career, watched her smile become tighter and her visits to Texas become more frequent, as if she needed to remember who she was before his world tried to erase her. And when she finally confronted him, when she'd asked him point blank, "Do you even want me here, Anthony? Or do you just want the idea of me?" He'd failed the test. "Of course I want you here. You're my wife." Then act like it. Defend me. Stand up to your mother. Choose me when it's hard, not just when it's easy. He'd open his mouth. Nothing came out. The silence had stretched between them like a chasm. Rebecca had nodded slowly, something dying in her eyes. That's what I thought. Now, 35,000 feet above Tennessee, Anthony pressed his palms against his eyes. "I won't stay silent this time," he whispered to the empty cabin. "I swear to God, Rebecca, I won't stay silent." But even as he said it, terror clawed at his throat. What if he was too late? What if his silence had already cost him everything? What if he landed in Texas only to find that the woman he'd loved and failed was gone, and the child he'd never known was the only piece of her left? The jet engines hummed their relentless countdown. 90 minutes to landing. 90 minutes to discover whether love could be rebuilt from the ruins of cowardice, or whether some silences were too deadly to survive. 5 months earlier, the kitchen of Nora's sister's catering smelled like home, if home were made of butter, brown sugar, and the kind of love that couldn't be bought at any price. Rebecca stood at the industrial mixer, watching cream cheese and butter blend into something smooth and perfect, while Marvin Saye crooned from a radio perched on the shelf above the spice rack. "Becca, we need 2 more pans of cornbread for the Miller anniversary party." Jane called from the front, her voice carrying over the ding of the order bell. "Already in the oven?" Rebecca called back, wiping her hands on her apron. The same floral print apron their mother had worn for 20 years, faded now but still sturdy. This kitchen was their inheritance. Not money or property, but recipes written in their mother's careful cursive, techniques learned at her elbow, and the bone-deep knowledge that food could heal what words couldn't touch. Eliza Morgan had started the catering business in their family kitchen 30 years ago, cooking for church functions and neighborhood celebrations. She'd built it dish by dish, reputation by reputation, until Greater Hope Baptist wouldn't dream of holding an event without her mac and cheese. By the time she'd passed 4 years ago, she'd left behind more than recipes. She left a legacy of nourishment that went deeper than full stomachs. Rebecca and Jane had taken that legacy and expanded it. They'd rented the small commercial space, invested in proper equipment, hired 2 part-time helpers. Within a year, they catered the mayor's campaign dinner. Within 2, they had a waiting list for holiday bookings. Their mother would have been proud. Rebecca pressed her hand to her lower back, trying to ease the ache that had become her constant companion. At 3 months pregnant, she wasn't showing yet, not obviously, anyway, but her body knew. Her body was screaming. "You okay?" Jane appeared in the doorway, eyebrow raised in that way that meant she already knew the answer. "Just tired." "You've been just tired for 2 weeks. Jane crossed her arms. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't a sample spoonful while cooking?" Rebecca couldn't remember. Time had become a blur of orders, prep work, deliveries, and the constant, gnawing nausea that hit her in waves. "I'll eat after we finish the Miller order. That's what you said yesterday." Before Rebecca could respond, another wave of nausea crashed over her. She gripped the counter, breathing through her nose, willing her stomach to settle. Not here. Not now. They had $300 worth of food to finish before noon. Jane was at her side immediately. "That's it. You're sitting down." "Jane!" "I'm not asking." Jane steered her toward the small office in back. "Sit. I'll finish the cornbread." Rebecca wanted to protest, but her legs were trembling. She sank into the folding chair they'd salvaged from a church donation pile, head in her hands. Through the wall, she could hear Jane humming along with the radio, hear the clatter of pans and the soft thud of the oven door closing. Familiar sounds. Safe sounds. The soundtrack of a life she was building from the wreckage of one that had shattered. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach. "Your grandma would have loved you," she whispered. "She would have spoiled you rotten, taught you how to make her peach cobbler, told you stories about growing up in Louisiana." Her throat tightened. "She would have told me I was strong enough to do this alone. She did it. Raised me and Jane when Daddy left, built a business from nothing, never complained, never quit." Rebecca's voice cracked. "I just wish she was here to show me how." 3 months later, the kitchen had become both sanctuary and battlefield. On good days, Rebecca moved through it with the muscle memory of 1,000 meals prepared, 1,000 orders fulfilled. She learned to keep ginger candy in her apron pocket, to breathe through the waves of nausea, to ignore the way her ankles swelled by midday. On bad days, she fought just to stay upright. Today was a bad day. They were catering a retirement party for Coach Henderson, a San Marcos legend who taught 3 generations of kids, including Rebecca and Jane. The order was massive: fried chicken, collard greens, black-eyed peas, cornbread, sweet potato pie, and her mother's famous peach cobbler. Rebecca had been on her feet since 5 a.m. Now, at 2 in the afternoon, the kitchen swam in her vision. "Becca, you're swaying." Maria, one of their part-time helpers, said nervously, "Maybe you should." "I'm fine." Rebecca steadied herself against the counter. "Just need water." But when she reached the glass, her hand trembled so badly she knocked it over. Water spread across the stainless steel surface, pooling around the cutting board. She stared at it, suddenly overwhelmed by the simple task of cleaning it up. "That's it," Jane announced, appearing from the front. "You're going home. We have 2 hours until delivery. And Maria and I can handle it." Jane's voice was firm, but her eyes were worried. "Becca, you look like you're about to pass out. Go home. Rest. We've got this." Pride warred with exhaustion. Pride lost. Rebecca untied her apron slowly, hand shaking. "The cobbler needs 10 more minutes at 350. Then it has to cool for..." "I know, Becca. I made Mama's cobbler 100 times." Jane squeezed her shoulder. "Go." Rebecca made it to the small apartment above the bakery next door. 3 rooms that smelled like cinnamon and yeast in the ovens below. She collapsed on the second-hand couch, not even bothering to take off her shoes. The silence pressing around her. For months, she'd outrun it with work, with orders, with a constant motion that kept her from thinking too hard about the reality of her situation. But here, alone, the silence won. She was 6 months pregnant, divorced, living above a bakery in her hometown while her ex-husband lived in a Manhattan penthouse worth more than this entire street. And she was terrified. not of labor or delivery or the logistics of raising a child alone, though those fears certainly existed. No. She was terrified that one day her child would ask about their father, and she'd have to explain that she'd loved a man who'd been too weak to love her back loudly. Rebecca's hand moved to her belly, feeling the strong kicks that had become regular now. Her son, she'd learned at the ultrasound last week, was active, healthy, determined to make his presence known. "Your daddy is a good man who made a coward's choice," she whispered. "He loved me, I think, in his way, but his way wasn't enough." Tears slid down her temples. His mother looked at me like I was dirt, like I'd crawled out of nowhere to contaminate their precious family line. And when I needed him to stand up to tell her that I was his wife and she needed to respect that, her voice broke. He stayed silent. The baby kicked hard, as if in protest. "I know, baby. I know." Rebecca pressed both hands to her stomach. "But here's what I need you to understand. Silence in the face of disrespect is agreement. And I won't teach you to accept that. I won't teach you that love is enough when it doesn't come with protection." She sat up slowly, wiping her eyes with the heels of her hands. "If Anthony couldn't fight for me, I'll fight for myself and this child." The words came out steady now, solid as a foundation being poured. "I'll teach you that you're worthy of people who defend you. I'll teach you that you're mama's people. Your grandmother's recipes, your aunt's laugh, this community that raised me, are nothing to be ashamed of." She stood, legs still shaky but stronger now. "And I'll teach you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone who won't fight for you." Present day, 2 weeks before Jane's call, the dinner rush for Mayor Hendrick's retirement party was in full swing. The kitchen was organized chaos. Pans clattering, timers beeping, Jane calling out orders while Rebecca plated the final batch of ribs. "We need those last 3 platters in 5 minutes." Jane shouted. Rebecca nodded, but the room tilted suddenly. She grabbed the counter, breathing hard. "Becca, I'm good. Just give me a second." But the seconds stretched. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, too sharp. Her vision tunneled. The sounds around her became muffled, distant, as if she were underwater. "Rebecca!" She saw Jane running toward her, saw Maria dropping a tray, saw the floor rising up to meet her face. Then nothing. She woke to sirens and Jane's voice, high and terrified, saying things Rebecca couldn't quite process. "Blood pressure is spiking. 8 months along. Need to get her to the hospital now." Rebecca tried to speak, but her tongue felt thick. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Still round. Still there. The baby. "Jane!" she managed to whisper. Her sister's face appeared above her, streaked with tears. "I'm here. I'm right here. Just stay with me, okay? Just stay with me." The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed. Through the small window, Rebecca could see her kitchen, the place she'd rebuilt her life, the inheritance she protected, the proof that she could survive without Anthony Johnson. But as the ambulance pulled away and Jane gripped her hand like a lifeline, Rebecca understood with sudden, brutal clarity. Survival wasn't the same as living, and her son deserved a mother who was still alive to teach him how to be strong, even if that meant swallowing her pride and letting Jane make the call she'd forbidden months ago. Even if that meant letting Anthony back in, not for her, but for the child they created in a marriage that hadn't been strong enough to survive his silence. The tires of the rental car screamed as Anthony took the turn into St. David's Medical Center too fast. He left the jet at the private airstrip and grabbed the first vehicle available, a sedan that felt like a cage compared to custom cars he was used to. None of that mattered. Nothing mattered except the 8-story building looming ahead, lit up against the dark Texas sky like a beacon or a warning. He abandoned the car in the emergency lane, engine still running, keys in the ignition. Someone shouted after him. He didn't stop. The automatic doors parted. The smell hit him immediately, antiseptic in fear, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like insects. A security guard moved to intercept him, but Anthony's face must have conveyed something that made him step back. "Maternity ward," Anthony said, voice hoarse. "Rebecca Nora. Where is she?" The admissions nurse looked up, startled by the urgency. "Sir, are you family?" I'm the father. The words felt foreign in his mouth, too new and too late all at once. Where is she? Something in his desperation must have registered. The nurse's expression softened. Fourth floor. Labor and delivery. But, sir, she's... Anthony was already moving toward the elevators, stabbing the button repeatedly as if that would make them arrive faster. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man he barely recognized. Shirt wrinkled, hair disheveled, eyes wild with something that looked dangerously close to panic. The elevator climbed with agonizing slowness. Second floor. Third floor. Each second stretched into hours. Please let her be alive. Please. The fourth floor was quieter than he expected. Hushed voices, soft beeping, the occasional cry of a newborn from behind closed doors. Under different circumstances, it might have felt peaceful, hopeful. Tonight it felt like a waiting room for verdicts he wasn't ready to hear. Can I help you? A nurse at the station looked up, professional smile already in place. Rebecca Nora. He couldn't finish the sentence. Too many versions, none of them adequate. I'm her ex-husband. I'm the father. I'm the man who destroyed everything we had. Room 447. The nurse said gently, understanding somehow. But you should know. Anthony was already walking, following the room numbers. 441, 443, 445. The door was closed. Through the small window, he could see machines, monitors, and Jane Norris sitting in a chair with her head in her hands. He knocked softly. Jane's head snapped up. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Then her expression transformed into something that could have stripped paint. She stood and opened the door, just wide enough to block his entry. You have some nerve showing up here. Her voice was low, controlled, lethal. Jane, please. I need to see her. You need? Jane's laugh was bitter. Now you have needs? Where were your needs when my sister was collapsing in our kitchen? When she was hiding her pregnancy because she was too proud to tell you? When she was working 14-hour days while carrying your child because she'd rather die than look weak to the man who let his mother treat her like garbage? Each word landed like a physical blow. Anthony absorbed them because he deserved every single one. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right. But I'm here now and I need to see her. Please. Jane studied him with eyes that missed nothing, his wrinkled clothes, his red-rimmed eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. She was weighing whether he deserved this moment, whether his presence would help or hurt. Finally, she stepped aside. She's unconscious, Jane said flatly. Has been since they brought her in. They're prepping her for emergency surgery. Anthony's legs nearly buckled. Surgery? Her blood pressure is through the roof. The baby's in distress. They don't know. Jane's voice cracked, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown. They don't know if they can save them both. The room was small, dominated by the hospital bed where Rebecca lay motionless. An oxygen mask covered her face. IVs snaked from her arms. Monitors beeped in steady, relentless rhythm, proof of life, but barely. Anthony moved toward her like a man in a dream or a nightmare. This couldn't be Rebecca, his Rebecca, who'd laughed at farmers' markets and danced in his penthouse kitchen and made him believe in second chances. This woman looked fragile, diminished, fighting a battle he couldn't see. Becca, he whispered, taking her hand. It was warm but limp, her fingers not responding to his touch. I'm here. I'm sorry I wasn't here before, but I'm here now. Nothing. Just the steady beep of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. You should have told me, he continued, voice breaking. About the baby. About any of it. I would have, he stopped. Would have what? Come running? Fixed everything? He'd already proven what he would have done. Exactly what he'd always done. Not enough. Mr. Johnson? Anthony turned to find a doctor in surgical scrubs standing in the doorway, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who delivered thousands of babies and knew when to be gentle and when to be brutally honest. I'm Dr. Okafor. I'll be performing Ms. Nora's emergency C-section. Anthony stood, still holding Rebecca's hand. What's happening? Jane said. Your wife. Ex-wife. Jane corrected coldly from the corner. Is experiencing severe preeclampsia. Dr. Okafor continued without missing a beat. Her blood pressure has reached dangerous levels. 180 over 115. At this stage, both mother and baby are at significant risk. The baby's oxygen levels are dropping, and Ms. Nora is showing signs of potential organ stress. The medical terminology swirled around Anthony like a foreign language. He caught fragments, eclampsia, seizure risk, fetal distress, but couldn't piece them together into anything that made sense. What does that mean? He asked. What are you saying? Dr. Okafor met his eyes directly. I'm saying we need to deliver this baby within the hour, or we could lose them both. The room tilted. Anthony gripped the bed rail to steady himself. But she's only... He looked at Jane desperately. How far along is she? 33 weeks, Jane said. The baby will be premature, Dr. Okafor acknowledged. But we have an excellent NICU. At 33 weeks, survival rates are very good. However, she paused, choosing her words carefully. There are risks to both patients during the surgery itself. Ms. Nora's blood pressure makes her vulnerable to complications, stroke, seizure, hemorrhaging. I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Anthony's throat closed. She'll be okay, though. You'll make sure she's okay. Dr. Okafor's expression softened with something that looked like pity. We'll do everything in our power. But, Mr. Johnson, I need you to sign consent forms. And I need to ask you a question that's never easy. She pulled papers from the clipboard she'd been holding. In the event of catastrophic complications during surgery, if we reach a point where we cannot save both patients, you'll need to give us guidance on whose life to prioritize. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. What? Anthony's voice came out strangled. You're asking me to choose? I'm asking you to consider the possibility. No. He backed away from the bed, from the papers, from the impossible choice being placed in his hands. No. You save them both. That's not a choice. There is no choice. Mr. Johnson. I said no. His voice cracked, raw and desperate. You don't get to ask me that. You don't get to make me. He couldn't finish. Couldn't breathe. The fluorescent lights were too bright. The walls too close. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to arrive, fix things, make everything right with money or power or force of will. Instead, he was being asked to play God. Anthony. Jane's voice cut through a spiral. She'd moved closer, her anger temporarily eclipsed by something that might have been compassion. Sign the papers. I can't. You have to. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. My sister has been fighting alone for 7 months. She's been strong enough for both of you. But right now she can't fight. So you need to be strong enough to do what she'd want. What would she want? Anthony asked desperately. Jane's eyes filled with tears. The baby, she'd choose the baby. She's been choosing that baby every single day since she found out she was pregnant. Every meal she forced herself to eat when she had morning sickness. Every hour she worked when her feet were swollen. Every night she cried alone because she was terrified but refused to quit. Anthony looked at Rebecca, unconscious and fighting for her life, and understood with brutal clarity what Jane was saying. Rebecca had already made her choice, had been making it for months. The question was whether Anthony could be brave enough to honor it. His hands shook as he took the clipboard from Dr. Okafor. The consent form swam in his vision. Words about risks and liability in the cold, clinical language of medicine trying to contain the enormous weight of love and loss. In the event that both lives cannot be preserved, he checked a box, signed his name, became the man who might have to live with choosing his child over the woman he'd never stopped loving. Dr. Okafor took the clipboard gently. We'll do everything we can for both of them. I promise you that. Then she was gone, taking a team of nurses with her, wheeling Rebecca toward the operating room, while Anthony stood frozen in the hallway. Jane stood beside him, neither of them speaking. Finally, Anthony's legs gave out. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, head in his hands, and for the first time since he was a child, since before his father taught him that men didn't break, didn't cry, didn't show weakness, Anthony Johnson broke. Great. Choking sobs tore from his chest. His shoulders shook. Tears soaked through his fingers. "Please," he whispered to God or fate or anyone listening, "please don't make me live with that choice. Please save them both." Jane sank down beside him, her own tears falling silent, and together they waited for a verdict neither of them was ready to hear. The double doors to the operating room swung shut with finality that echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. Anthony stared at those doors, pale blue, scuffed at the bottom from years of gurneys passing through, as if he could will them open again, as if sheer desperation could reverse time, undo choices, rewrite the story that had led them here. But the doors stayed closed. Behind them, Rebecca was being cut open. Behind them, his son was fighting for his first breath. Behind them, everything Anthony had ever wanted and everything he'd ever destroyed hung in a balance he couldn't tip. "You should sit," Jane said quietly beside him. She'd moved from anger to something that looked like exhausted resignation, or maybe just grief that hadn't found its shape yet. "I can't." Anthony paced the small waiting area. 6 steps one direction, turn, 6 steps back. His Italian leather shoes squeaked against the linoleum. The sound grated against his nerves, but he couldn't stop moving. If he stopped, he'd have to feel the full weight of what was happening. If he stopped, he'd shatter. The clock on the wall read 1:17 a.m. time had become meaningless, but some part of his brain registered that it was Monday morning. In another life, the one he'd been living 12 hours ago, he'd be asleep in his Manhattan penthouse, alarm set for a 6 a.m. workout before a breakfast meeting with investors. That life felt like something that had happened to someone else. "How long does it take?" he asked, voice raw. Jane looked up from where she'd finally sat down, had leaned back against the wall. "A C-section? Usually 30 to 45 minutes. But with complications, she didn't finish. Didn't need to." Anthony resumed pacing. His phone had been vibrating in his pocket for the past hour. His assistant, his mother, board members wondering why he disappeared mid-flight. He'd silence it eventually, but could still feel the phantom buzz against his hip, the world demanding his attention, while the only thing that mattered was happening behind doors he couldn't breach. "She was happy, you know," Jane said suddenly. "Before you." Anthony stopped mid-stride. "I don't mean that as a dig," Jane continued, still staring at the ceiling. "I mean she was genuinely content. She had the catering business, her church, her community. She didn't need anything else." She finally looked at him. "Then you showed up at that farmer's market in your expensive shoes, and suddenly she wanted more, wanted to believe in something bigger than San Marcos." "Jane, I watched her fall in love with you," Jane interrupted, voice steady but edged with something sharp. "Watched her light up every time you called, every time you flew down to visit. She thought she'd found someone who saw her, really saw her, not just as different or exotic or refreshing, but as enough." The words struck like physical blows. "When she called to tell me you proposed, in our church, in front of everyone we knew, I cried, because I thought, finally, someone who loves my sister as loudly as she deserves." Jane stood, moving to face him directly. "But then you took her to New York, and I watched her disappear. Every phone call, she sounded smaller. Every visit home, she looked more exhausted. And when I asked what was wrong, she'd just smile and say she was adjusting." "I didn't know," Anthony said quietly. "She never told me. She shouldn't have had to." Jane's composure cracked. "Your mother was tearing her apart, and you just stood there, every passive-aggressive comment, every look that said Rebecca wasn't good enough, every time she was made to feel like an outsider in her own marriage. You said nothing." Anthony's eyes burned. "I thought I was protecting her by not engaging. I thought—" "You thought wrong." Jane's voice dropped. "My sister didn't need you to avoid conflict. She needed you to create it, to get loud and messy and uncomfortable in defending her. Because that's what love is, Anthony. It's not flowers and proposals and grand gestures. It's standing up when it's hard. It's choosing your person even when it costs you something. I know that now. Now might be too late." The words hung between them like a death knell. Behind the operating room doors, chaos unfolded with surgical precision. BP's climbing, 190 over 118. A nurse called out, eyes locked on the monitor. Dr. Okafor worked with steady hands, scalpel cutting through layers of tissue with practiced efficiency. Someone give me those readings every 30 seconds. And where's my NICU team? Standing by, another voice confirmed. Fetal heart rate dropping, 102/96. We need to move faster. Dr. Okafor's voice remained calm, but her movements accelerated. Almost there. Suction. Good. The surgical theater was a symphony of controlled urgency. Monitors beeped in frantic rhythm. Gloved hands moved in coordinated patterns born from thousands of hours of training. Everyone knew their role. Everyone understood the stakes. I can see the head, Dr. Okafor announced. Prepare for extraction. But even as she spoke, the main monitor shrieked a warning. BP spiking. 210 over 125. She's crashing. Give me magnesium sulfate now. Dr. Okafor's hands never stopped moving. We're not losing her. Stay with me, Rebecca. Rebecca's body convulsed once on the table. She's seizing. Hold her steady. Don't let her tear the incision. Nurses grabbed her shoulders and legs, fighting to keep her still, while Dr. Okafor delivered the baby with one final, careful pull. A tiny body emerged, purple and terrifyingly still. Baby's out. Dr. Okafor passed the infant to the NICU team, waiting beside the table. Get him breathing. The neonatal team descended on the tiny form. Suction, stimulation, oxygen. Seconds ticked by like hours. Then, finally, a thin, reedy cry pierced attention. We've got respiratory effort, the neonatal nurse called. He's breathing. But there was no time for celebration. Mother's pressure is still climbing, 220 over 130. She's hemorrhaging. I need more suction. Dr. Okafor were losing her. In the waiting room, Anthony had stopped pacing. He stood facing the doors, hands clasped behind his head, breathing like he'd just run a marathon. Words he'd never spoken aloud forced their way out in a desperate whisper. God, his voice cracked. I don't know if you're listening. I don't know if I have any right to ask. But please, please, don't let my silence be the last thing she remembers of me. Tears streamed unchecked down his face. I failed her. I know I did. I let fear and cowardice and my mother's approval matter more than the woman I promised to protect. But she doesn't deserve a pay for my weakness. That baby doesn't deserve to grow up without his mother because I wasn't brave enough. His legs trembled. He braced himself against the wall. If you're there, if any of this means anything, give me a chance to make it right. Let me show her who I should have been. Let me be the man she deserved from beginning. He sank to his knees, the cold floor hard against bone, and for the second time that night, Anthony Johnson broke. Not the controlled tears from earlier, but something deeper. Something that sounded like a man finally understanding what he'd lost and what he still might lose. Jane watched him from her seat, face unreadable. She'd spent months hating this man, blaming him for her sister's pain, for the pregnancy hidden in shame and pride. She wanted him to suffer the way Rebecca had suffered. Now, watching him pray to a God he probably never believed in, she realized he was suffering, had been suffering, maybe the entire time. Anthony, she said softly. He looked up, eyes red and swollen. Whatever happens, whatever comes through those doors, you need to be ready to fight, not with money or power or any of the things you're used to, but with presence, with consistency, with the courage you should have had the first time. He nodded, unable to speak. Jane took a breath. Rebecca deserves that. And so does your son. Your son. The word should have filled him with joy. Instead, they filled him with terror. What if his son's first breath was also Rebecca's last? What if the choice he'd made on those consent forms became reality? What if the doors burst open? A nurse emerged, surgical mask pulled down, expression urgent. Family of Rebecca Nora? Anthony and Jane both lunged forward. We need you to. But the nurse's words were drowned out by the sound that would haunt Anthony's nightmares for years to come. The long, unbroken tone of a flatline monitor. shrieking through the open doors behind her. Time stopped. The flatline sound cut through the waiting room like a blade through flesh. One long, unbroken note that meant only one thing. Death. Anthony's vision tunneled. His knees buckled. Somewhere far away, he heard Jane scream his ex-wife's name, but the sound came muted, distorted, like he was underwater and drowning. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no. Wait." The nurse grabbed his arm as he lunged toward the operating room doors. "Mr. Johnson, wait. They're working on her. You can't go in. She's dying." The words tore from his throat. "That sound. I know what that sound means." "They're doing CPR," the nurse said, voice firm but not unkind. Her grip on his arm was iron. "Dr. Okafor is one of the best. If anyone can bring her back. If..." Anthony's voice broke into something animalistic. "What do you mean if..." Behind those doors, chaos had erupted into something beyond control. "I need AP now." Dr. Okafor's voice cut through the alarm. Her hands compressed Rebecca's chest in steady rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, Rebecca. Don't you dare give up on me." Charging to 200, a nurse called. "Clear." Rebecca's body jolted on the table. The monitor remained flat. Again, 250. "Clear." Another jolt. Still nothing. Dr. Okafor resumed compressions, sweat beading on her forehead despite the frigid operating room temperature. "You've got a baby who needs you. Rebecca, you got people out there who need you. Fight." BP's undetectable. "I know. Someone get me." And then, like a miracle being born from desperation, the monitor hiccuped. One beep, then another, then the erratic but unmistakable rhythm of a heart remembering how to beat. "We got sinus rhythm," the nurse shouted. "BP's coming back. 80 over 50, climbing." Dr. Okafor kept her hands on Rebecca's chest, as if she could will that heartbeat to stay strong through sheer force of touch. Okay, you're okay. Stay with me now." The monitor beeped steadily, each tone a defiant proclamation. Still here. Still fighting. Not finished yet. "Someone let the family know," Dr. Okafor said, voice hoarse with relief and exhaustion. "And give me a status update on that baby." In the waiting room, Anthony had collapsed into Jane's arms, or maybe she collapsed into his. They clung to each other like survivors of shipwreck, both crying, both trying to breathe through the terror that still gripped their throats. "She's stable." The nurse had reappeared, slightly out of breath. Dr. Okafor brought her back. "She's stable." The words didn't make sense at first. Anthony's brain couldn't process them, couldn't reconcile the flatline sound, still echoing in his ears, with the concept of stable. "She's alive." Jane's voice was small, childlike. "She's alive." Critical, but alive. They're closing her up now. The nurse smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "And your baby is in the NICU. He's small, but he's breathing on his own. Would you like to meet him?" The neonatal intensive care unit was a forest of machines and monitors, each one tending to a tiny life that had arrived too soon. Incubators lined the walls like transparent cocoons, holding infants no bigger than Anthony's forearm. The nurse led him to one in the corner. "This is your son." Anthony stopped breathing. The baby was impossibly small. For pounds, maybe less. His skin was thin enough that Anthony could see the delicate network of veins beneath. Wires and tubes connected to his tiny chest, his foot monitoring everything, giving him what his premature body couldn't yet provide for itself. But his eyes were open, dark and unfocused, but open, and his miniature hand curled into a fist no bigger than a walnut. "Can I?" Anthony's voice failed. "Can I touch him?" "You can hold him," the NICU nurse said gently. She was older, with gray streaks in her hair, and the calm demeanor of someone who'd shepherded thousands of fragile lives through their earliest battles. "Skin-to-skin contact is good for preemies. Let me get you set up." She positioned a chair beside the incubator and guided Anthony through removing his shirt. His hands shook so badly he could barely manage the buttons. When he was ready, the nurse opened the incubator with practiced care. "Support his head. That's it. You've got him. And then Anthony was holding his son. The baby weighed nothing, was warm and fragile and real in a way that made everything else in Anthony's life feel like performance. This was flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood, a person who existed because Anthony and Rebecca had loved each other once upon a time, a person who almost didn't exist at all. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question, and his tiny hand grasped at air before landing against Anthony's chest. That's when Anthony broke for the third time that night. But these tears were different, not grief or terror or desperation. Something else, something that felt like awe and terror, and love so overwhelming it bordered on pain. "I'm your dad," Anthony whispered, voice thick. "I'm your dad, and I almost lost you before I even knew you existed." The baby's fingers played against the skin, impossibly small but unmistakably strong. "I'm going to mess this up," Anthony continued, tears streaming freely now. "I'm going to make mistakes. I'm probably going to embarrass you when you're older, and you're going to think I don't understand you." He pressed his lips gently to the baby's forehead. "But I promise you this. I will never let you feel unprotected. I will never let you wonder if I'm proud of you. I will never stay silent when you need me to be loud." His voice cracked. "I failed your mother. I let fear and weakness and other people's opinions matter more than defending the woman I loved. But I won't fail you. I swear on everything I am, I won't fail you." The baby's eyes closed slowly, his breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep. Trust, absolute and unearned, that this chest he was pressed against would keep him safe. Anthony didn't deserve that trust. Not yet, but God, he wanted to. Jane stood in the doorway of the NICU, watching through the glass. She'd been furious with Anthony for months, had blamed him for Rebecca's tears, for her exile from New York, for every moment of loneliness her sister had endured. Part of her still wanted to hate him, to keep him locked out of their lives the way he'd locked Rebecca out of his defense. But watching him now, shirt off, cradling a 4-pound baby against his chest while tears soaked his face, she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse, genuine love, and maybe, just maybe, the potential for genuine change. But potential isn't the same as proof, she reminded herself. And Rebecca deserves proof. The NICU nurse emerged quietly, careful not to disturb Anthony. She smiled at Jane. "He's a natural. Some fathers are terrified to touch preemies. He looks like he'd fight anyone who tried to take that baby away." Jane managed a small smile. "That baby is all he is right now. Is the mother recovering? They think she'll pull through. Thank God." The nurse glanced back at Anthony. "That baby needs them both." 30 minutes later, Anthony still hadn't moved. The baby slept on, skin warming against his father's heartbeat. A NICU doctor had come by to explain, 33 weeks gestation. For pounds, 2 ounces, lungs surprisingly strong for his age, but they'd need to monitor him for at least 3 weeks, maybe longer. Anthony had absorbed every word, asked questions about feeding schedules and developmental milestones and what signs to watch for. The billionaire who delegated everything was suddenly desperate to understand every detail of keeping this tiny human alive. "Have you thought about a name?" the nurse asked eventually. "It helps to call them something other than baby." Anthony looked down at his son, at the dark hair that matched Rebecca's, at the nose that was unmistakably his own genetic contribution, at the perfect blend of everything they created together. "Elijah," he said quietly, after Rebecca's grandmother. Jane, who'd entered the NICU silently, gasped. "You remember Nana Elijah?" Anthony looked up. "Rebecca told me about her once. How she raised 3 kids alone after her husband died. How she taught Rebecca that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about putting yourself back together afterward." He looked back down at his son. "Elijah Nora Johnson." He tested the name, let it settle. So he always carries her family with him. So he knows where he comes from. Jane pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes filling with fresh tears. Mama would have loved that. Will Rebecca? The question hung in the air, vulnerable and terrified. Jane took a breath. "I don't know, but it's a start." She moved closer, looking down at her nephew. "A better start than I expected from you. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hatred either. It was a fragile beginning of something that might, with work and time and consistent proof, become trust. Anthony held his son, Elijah, and made a silent promise to the woman recovering down the hall. I'll earn my way back, not with money or grand gestures, but with every day I show up, every time I choose him when it's hard, every moment I prove that I finally learned what it means to fight for the people I love. The baby stirred slightly, making that small questioning sound again. "I've got you," Anthony whispered. "I've got you, Elijah, and I'm not letting go." Outside the NICU windows, dawn was beginning to break over Texas. Pale light creeping across a sky that had been dark for far too long. A new day, a new life, and maybe, if he proved himself worthy, a new chance. Rebecca woke to the sound of beeping and the smell of antiseptic. For a moment, she didn't remember. Didn't know where she was or why her body felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together. Then the pain hit, deep surgical pain that radiated from her abdomen, and memory flooded back in fragments. The kitchen, collapsing. Jane's terrified face. Sirens. Doctors shouting words like preeclampsia and emergency, and we're losing her. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Flat. Empty. The weight she'd carried for 8 months. Gone. The baby. Panic seized her throat. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. Everything hurt. Everything felt wrong. "Rebecca." The voice came from her left. Soft, hoarse, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. She turned her head slowly. Anthony sat in the chair beside her bed, eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, still wearing the wrinkled shirt and slacks he must have traveled in. And in his arms, wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, was a tiny bundle that made her breath catch. "He's okay," Anthony said quickly, seeing her panic. "He's small, but he's okay. For pounds, 2 ounces. The doctors say he's strong." Rebecca stared at the baby. Her baby, their baby. Trying to reconcile the fragile reality with the active presence she felt kicking inside her for months. He looked impossibly small against Anthony's chest. Impossibly vulnerable. "Let me." Her voice came out scratched and weak. "I need to hold him." Anthony stood carefully, moving to her bedside. He lowered the baby into her arms with a gentleness she didn't know he possessed, adjusting the blanket, making sure she had proper support. The moment the baby settled against her chest, something inside Rebecca cracked open. This was her son, the life she protected through morning sickness and swollen ankles and 14-hour workdays. The secret she'd carried alone, because the alternative was letting Anthony back into her life before she'd rebuilt herself. Tears slid down her temples as she studied his face. Eyes closed, features scrunched in sleep, a small fist pressed against his cheek. He had Anthony's nose, her mouth, an expression that suggested he'd already survived more than any newborn should have to. "I'm sorry," Anthony said, voice breaking. "God, Rebecca, I'm so sorry." She looked up at him, still disoriented, still trying to process that he was here at all. "How did you? Jane called you." It wasn't a question. She did. "Told me you were in labor. That you might not." He couldn't finish. "I got on the jet immediately. I should have been here sooner. Should have been here for all of it." Rebecca looked back down at their son, using him as a shield against the intensity of Anthony's presence. 7 months. She'd spent 7 months building a life without him, teaching herself not to check her phone hoping for his name, training her heart not to break every time she remembered what they'd had and lost. Now he was here, looking at her like she was the answer to prayers she hadn't known he was capable of making. "What's his name?" she asked quietly. "I was waiting for you." Anthony's voice was gentle. "But I was thinking, if you agree, Elijah, after your grandmother." The name hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't told him much about Nana Elijah, just one conversation early in their relationship. Late at night in his penthouse, when she'd shared stories about the woman who'd raised her mother with nothing but faith and determination, that he remembered, that he'd chosen to honor her family with their son's name. It should have meant something. Maybe it did. But Rebecca was too exhausted, too raw, too angry beneath her exhaustion to let it soften her yet. "Elijah Nora Johnson," Anthony continued. So he always carries your family with him. My family, Rebecca repeated, something sharp creeping into her tone. The family your mother thought was beneath hers. Anthony flinched. Becca, don't. She held up a hand. Careful not to jostle the baby. Don't call me that. You lost that right when you stood silent while your mother treated me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. I know. You're right. I know I failed you. Do you? Rebecca's voice gained strength despite her physical weakness. Do you really know, Anthony? Because from where I'm lying, having just survived surgery that could have killed me and our son, I don't think you have any idea what I've been through. The baby stirred slightly at the change in her tone. Rebecca forced herself to breathe, to calm down for his sake. But the words kept coming. 7 months of buried pain rising to the surface like infection from a wound that had never properly healed. Where were you 4 months ago when I was so sick with morning sickness I couldn't keep water down? Her eyes locked onto his, unflinching. Where were you when I was fainting in parking lots, when my ankles were so swollen I couldn't fit into any of my shoes? You never told me. I shouldn't have had to tell you. The force of her words surprised them both. If you'd fought for our marriage, if you'd been the husband you promised to be, I never would have left, and you would have been there. Anthony's face crumbled, but Rebecca wasn't finished. Where were you when I was lying awake at night, terrified that I died during delivery and leave our son alone? When I was writing letters to a baby I might not survive to raise, trying to explain why his father didn't know he existed? Rebecca, please. Where were you when people in this town, people I've known my entire life, whisper behind my back about the New York billionaire who married me and threw me away? When I had to smile through their pity, their judgment, their questions about what I did wrong to lose you. Her voice broke, but she pushed through. I worked 14-hour days while pregnant because I refused to be anyone's cautionary tale. I hid my condition as long as I could because I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me as a victim. I built a business and a life and a future for this baby because I had to believe I could do it alone. Tears streamed down her face now, but her gaze remained steel. And I almost died, Anthony. The doctors told Jane I almost died. My blood pressure was so high, they didn't know if they could save us both. Do you understand that? While you were in your Manhattan penthouse closing deals and ignoring your phone, I was here, fighting to stay alive long enough to meet my son. Anthony had sunk back into the chair, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry. You're right about all of it. I was a coward. I let my mother's disapproval matter more than your dignity. I let fear of confrontation cost me everything that mattered. He looked up, face wet with tears. But I'm here now. I want to make it right. I want to be the man you deserve from the beginning. Rebecca studied him. This man she loved. This man who'd broken her. This man who was a father of a child whether she wanted him to be or not. You don't get to play a hero now, she said, voice quiet but cutting. You don't get to swoop in at the last second and act like your presence makes up for 7 months of absence. For 8 months of me carrying your child alone. I know. I'm not trying to. Let me finish. Anthony fell silent. Rebecca looked down at Elijah, at the tiny face that would grow up asking questions she'd have to answer. Questions about his father, about why his parents weren't together, about what love was supposed to look like. She needed to get this right. For him. You want to be in his life? She looked back at Anthony. Prove it. Not to me, to him. Not with money or gifts or grand gestures. With presence. With consistency. With the courage to show up on the hard days. Not just the easy ones. Her voice grew firmer. You want him to respect you? Show him what it means to defend the people you love. You want him to trust you? Be trustworthy. Every single day. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it costs you something. Anthony nodded, unable to speak. Because I won't have my son growing up thinking love is about beautiful words and empty promises. I won't teach him that silence in the face of disrespect is acceptable. I won't let him become a man who hurts people away. Her voice cracked. The way you hurt me. The machines beeped steadily in the silence that followed. Elijah slept on, oblivious to the reckoning happening around him. "I understand," Anthony finally whispered. "And you're right. About all of it." He stood slowly, meeting her eyes. "I can't undo the past 7 months. Can't give you back the time I should have been here. But if you'll give me the chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I've learned. That I could be the father he deserves." Rebecca wanted to say yes. Part of her, the part that had fallen in love with him at a farmer's market 3 years ago, wanted to believe people could change. But the part that had survived alone, that had built a life from ruins, that had almost died while he lived in oblivion, that part knew better than to trust promises. "Then prove it," she said simply. "Starting now. Starting with the midnight feedings and dirty diapers and exhaustion. Starting with being here when it's not convenient, when it's not romantic, when it's just hard and thankless work." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You can be his father, Anthony, but you'll have to earn it every single day. And if you fail in the way you failed me, if you're silent when he needs to be loud, if you choose comfort over courage, I will make sure he knows that real love looks different." Anthony absorbed the blow because he deserved it, because she was right. Love wasn't words. Love was action. Consistent, uncomfortable, courageous action. And for the first time in his life, Anthony Johnson understood that building a relationship would be harder than building an empire, but infinitely more worth it. "I won't fail him," Anthony said, voice steady despite his tears. "I swear to you, Rebecca, I won't fail him." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, searching for something she desperately wanted to find but couldn't quite trust yet. "We'll see," she said finally. And in that simple phrase, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but not complete rejection either, lay the fragile possibility of something new. Not a second chance at their marriage, but maybe, if he proved himself, a first chance at being the father Elijah deserved. 3 weeks later, the Texas sun rose hot and relentless over San Marcos, painting Jane's modest 2-bedroom house in shades of gold and amber. Inside, the smell of coffee mixed with the faint scent of baby powder and the exhaustion that clung to every surface like dust. Rebecca sat in a rocking chair by the window, Elijah cradled against her chest, his tiny body warm and surprisingly heavy for something so small. He'd been home from a NICU for 5 days now. 5 pounds, 8 ounces, cleared by doctors who seemed almost surprised by how well he thrived. Rebecca wasn't surprised. Elijah had her stubborn streak, her refusal to quit even when the odds weren't favorable. The sound of a car door closing made her look up. Through the window, she watched Anthony climb out of the rental sedan. He'd been driving for weeks now. Not a luxury car, nothing flashy, just basic transportation that wouldn't draw attention in this neighborhood. He'd been coming every morning at 7 a.m. for 3 weeks straight. At first, Rebecca had expected him to miss a day, oversleep, get called back to New York for some urgent business matter that would prove more important than this fragile commitment he'd made. But he kept showing up. Jane opened the front door before he could knock, her usual morning greeting. "You know where everything is." "Thank you, Jane." "Don't thank me. Thank Rebecca for not kicking you out yet." Through the doorway, Rebecca watched Anthony smile. Not the polished, confident smile she remembered from their marriage, but something smaller, more genuine, edged with humility. He entered carrying nothing but himself. No expensive gifts. No designer baby clothes. No grand gestures meant to buy his way back into their good graces. Just presence. "Morning," he said softly, seeing Rebecca in the chair. "Howdy, sleep." "Up every 2 hours." Rebecca's voice was hoarse from exhaustion. "But he's eating well. 8 ounces this morning." Anthony moved closer, kneeling beside the rocker, so he was at eye level with his son. "Hey, little man, you giving your mom a hard time." Elijah made a small sound. Not quite a cry, more like a complaint, and Anthony's entire face transformed with something that looked like wonder. "I can take him," Anthony offered. "You should rest." Rebecca hesitated, not because she didn't trust him with Elijah. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd watched him learn to change diapers, mix formula, burp a baby at 2 a.m. with the same focused intensity he probably brought to board meetings. He was competent, gentle, constantly checking to make sure he was doing things right. But handing over her son meant acknowledging that Anthony was becoming exactly what he'd promised to be, present. And acknowledgement felt dangerous, like opening a door she'd worked so hard to bolt shut. Still, exhaustion won. "Okay," she said quietly, "but wake me if he needs to eat." Anthony took Elijah with practice care now, supporting his head, adjusting the blanket. The baby settled against his chest immediately, recognizing the heartbeat he'd been pressed against for hours in the NICU. Rebecca watched for a moment longer, then forced herself to stand. Her body still ached, the incision healing but tender, her energy depleted in ways she'd never experienced before. She made it to Jane's guest bedroom and collapsed onto bed fully clothed, asleep before her head fully hit the pillow. In the living room, Anthony walked slow circles with Elijah, the motion that seemed to calm him most. Through the window, he could see Jane's neighbors starting their day. Mr. Patterson washing his truck, Mrs. Chin tending her garden, kids playing basketball in a driveway 3 houses down. This was Rebecca's world, not his Manhattan penthouse with its sterile views and silent rooms. This world had texture, sound, life in a ways it had never possessed. "Your mama's people are good people," Anthony whispered to Elijah. "Took me too long to understand that. Took me too long to understand a lot of things." Elijah's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, but searching, like he was trying to make sense of the voice he'd been hearing for weeks now. "I know I wasn't there at the beginning. Know I've got a lot to make up for." Anthony's voice was thick. "But I'm not going anywhere, buddy, even when it's hard. Even when your mama doesn't trust me yet. I'm staying." The baby's hand found Anthony's finger, gripped it with surprising strength. "Yeah," Anthony said softly. "I'm staying." An hour later, Jane emerged from her bedroom to find Anthony in the kitchen. Elijah strapped to his chest in the baby carrier while he washed the dishes from last night's dinner. She stopped in the doorway, arms crossed, studying the scene that would have seemed impossible 2 months ago. Anthony Johnson, billionaire, board member of 6 companies, man who probably had people do everything for him, was elbow deep in soapy water while a newborn slept against his chest. "You don't have to do that," Jane said. Anthony looked up. "I know, but you and Rebecca do enough. Figure I can help. We have a dishwasher. Uses too much water. Rebecca mentioned you've been worried about the utility bills." Jane's eyes narrowed. "And you're not going to offer to pay them? Would you let me?" "No. Then I'll just wash the dishes." Anthony returned to scrubbing a pot. "Save you some money on the water bill instead." Despite herself, Jane felt her resistance crack slightly. She moved into the kitchen, poured herself coffee, and leaned against the counter. "You're really committed to this," she observed. "Yes, even when Rebecca barely speaks to you. Even when you're sleeping on Mrs. Patterson's pull-out couch instead of hotel. Even when you're washing our dishes at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday." Anthony paused, hands still in the water. "Especially then, because that's when it matters. Not when it's easy or comfortable or impressive. When it's just..." He gestured around the small kitchen with soapy hands. "This..." Jane took a long sip of coffee, considering. "My sister's been hurt before," she said finally, "by men who made promises they didn't keep. By a husband who loved her but couldn't defend her. She rebuilt herself from that, but it left scars. I know. So, if you're doing this to win her back..." "I'm not." Anthony's voice was firm. "I'm doing this to be Elijah's father. If Rebecca ever forgives me, ever wants to try again, that's her choice. But I'm here for him regardless." It was the right answer. Jane could hear the truth in it. "Good," she said, "because he deserves better than a father who shows up when it's convenient. He deserves better than me, period. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of him anyway." That afternoon, Anthony showed up at Nora's sister's catering. The kitchen was chaos, Jane and Maria prepping for a wedding reception, orders piling up, the phone ringing off the hook. Rebecca was supposed to be resting, but she'd insisted on coming in to help with administrative work. Anthony found her in the small office, Elijah asleep in a portable bassinet beside the desk while she reviewed invoices with furrowed brow. "You're supposed to be resting," he said from the doorway. "I'm sitting down." That counts. She didn't look up. What can I do? Go back to New York. Run your companies. Live your life. Rebecca. She finally looked at him, exhausted and guarded. What, Anthony? Let me help. Please. Even if it's just, I don't know, answering the phone. Taking orders. Whatever you need. Rebecca wanted to say no, wanted to maintain the wall between them. But she was drowning in work and exhaustion, and Jane was too busy cooking to help with the business side. And, fine, she said. There's a stack of delivery confirmations that need to be called. Numbers are on the sheet. Don't make promises we can't keep. Anthony took the list like it was $1 billion contract. For the next 3 hours, he worked the phone, confirming deliveries, taking new orders, handling complaints with the same negotiation skills he used in boardrooms. He learned the menu, the pricing, the rhythm of how the business operated. Around 5 p.m., Mrs. Patterson came in to pick up her order and stopped short seeing Anthony behind the counter. Well, she said, eyebrow raised. Didn't expect to see you here. Just helping out, ma'am. She studied him with the sharp assessment of a woman who'd lived long enough to know when someone was genuine and when they were performing. You still staying in my guest room? Yes, ma'am. Appreciate you letting me. She collected her order, then paused at the door. You're doing better than I expected, Mr. Johnson. But remember, showing up is just the beginning. Staying is what counts. Yes, ma'am. After she left, Anthony found Rebecca watching him from the office doorway. Mrs. Patterson doesn't give compliments lightly, she said quietly. I'm not doing this for compliments. I know. Rebecca's expression was unreadable. That's what worries me. Worries you? Because if you actually change, if you actually become the man you're pretending to be right now, her voice caught. I'll have to forgive you eventually. And I'm not ready for that. The honesty of it struck Anthony silent. You don't have to forgive me, he said finally. Ever, if that's what you need. I'm not here to earn forgiveness. I'm here to be the father Elijah deserves. Everything else, he shrugged, is up to you. Rebecca held his gaze for a long moment, then retreated back to the office without another word. But something had shifted. Anthony could feel it. That evening, as the sun began its descent, Anthony carried Elijah to the small park 2 blocks from Jane's house. The air was cooling finally, the heat of the day giving way to something gentler. He sat on a bench, his son cradled in his arms, and watched the sky turn from blue to gold to pink. Your mama's people have a saying, he told Elijah softly. They say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Elijah made a small sound, eyes closed but listening in whatever way newborns listen. I should have defended her 20 months ago. Should have stood up to my mother, to the board members who questioned my judgment, to everyone who made her feel less than. But I can't go back. Anthony's voice grew stronger. So I'm starting now, planting trees. Building something that'll take years to grow, but will be worth it. He pressed a kiss to Elijah's forehead. This time, I'll fight for you both. Not with silence, not with avoidance, but with presence and courage and the kind of love that shows up even when it's uncomfortable. The sunset painted them both in gold. Father and son, 3 weeks into learning each other, years away from true reconciliation, but moving in the right direction. I won't be silent again, Anthony whispered. I promise you that. As Elijah slept peacefully in his arms, wrapped in the warm Texas evening, Anthony Johnson began to understand that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a direction. And for the first time in his life, he was finally traveling the right way.
Wow, thank you so much for watching. Seriously, your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, the biggest way you can show me love and encourage me to keep creating is to hit that like button and subscribe. Takes 1 second, but it makes a huge difference. Speaking of more videos, I've got another exciting one lined up for you. Just click on the next video showing right on your screen now to keep the fun going. See you there.